Hello, everyone. Back for the third time today. Um, so, if you haven't been watching these in order, right now I am on part six, or my part six, of American Proto Zionism and the Book of Lehi Recontextualizing the Rise of Mormonism by Don Bradley from Utah State University. It was his thesis statement on his way to, I think, becoming a PhD and in something from about Mormonism. And so basically, it's been following the rise of Christian Zionism in America and Jewish Zionism in America, and how the Mormons kind of synthesized that, and how very Jewish the original plan was, and how basically they wanted to bring Jews into America, but to keep them as Jews so that they can then migrate back to Palestine. So they were actually more Jewish Zionists than they were Christian Zionists because they didn't want to convert anyone that was Jewish. Um, and so that's basically what we're learned. So, okay, there's a lost book of Lehi. So in Mormonism, there's a Book of Mormon that we all know, but apparently there was this lost book of Lehi that was written first, but somebody stole it, or I think a mob or some enemy stole it, or something like that, and it disappeared somehow. And so, they don't really have much evidence of it except for, like, second, third hand testimony of people who read it or saw parts of it or heard about parts of it or what it was about, or they tried to reconstruct it, and they're showing about how its relationship is more Hebraic and Jewish than it is Christian. And so basically they're just trying to show the Jewishness of the original plan of Joseph Smith, which changed. We've been seeing that he's been changing 100 times. And we're also watching part 3 of Billy Crone's Mormonism. It's a 10-part series. We're on part 3. World Religions, Cult, and the Occult. Billy Crone. You can look him up. Get a Life Media. Get a Life Media. Billy Crone. Mormonism. So, okay, we are at. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I was checking something. The nature and challenge of reconstructive work on the Book of Lehi narrative. The most difficult part of the work of reconstruction is the inference involved. This will also be the most difficult sell for the reader of the reconstruction. The ideal way to recover the lost stories of the Book of Lehi would be to find the lost manuscript. Another straightforward way to recover stories from the lost manuscript would be if someone had made and transcribed a detailed interview with Joseph Smith or Martin Harris and mined their memories for the Book of Lehi content. After nearly 190 years, it seems unlikely that this missing manuscript will emerge. Over the time, no records of detailed interviews about the lost pages have been recorded. The closest thing to this is Freyet Lapalm's interview with Joseph Smith Sr., detailed below. In the absence of the Book of Lehi manuscript or a detailed interview about its contents, some readers may be skeptical that we can meaningfully recover information about the narrative of the lost manuscript. The work of reconstructing a lost narrative is necessarily probabilistic and provisional. Each reconstruction of narrative elements from the Book of Lehi herein is presented as the best working model for how the varied data fits into a cohesive narrative whole. Nevertheless, though it would be wonderful to locate a detailed interview about the lost pages, or heaven knows, the lost manuscript itself, this is not how our knowledge of the past usually advances. Rather, a philosopher of history, Robin G. Gollenwood, laid out the enlargement of historical knowledge comes about mainly through finding how to us as evidence this or that kind of perceived fact which as historians have hitherto thought useless to themselves. Hold on. Hold on. And even if a source purporting to be the Book of Lehi manuscript or a transcription of an interview about it emerged, such a source would need to be tested to ensure that it was genuine. And in addition to physical tests, it would necessarily be tested using the very same data about the Book of Lehi's contents that we are examining here. Only a document consistent with the exact fragment of Book of Lehi narrative could be deemed authentic. There is a great deal of extant data relevant to the content of the lost pages. The historian tasks on this subject is to use that data inferentially to craft better and better models and increasingly approximate the content of the Book of Lehi. Once reconstructive models have been crafted and presented, these can be modified, replaced, or otherwise improved on, both by present author and for future scholars. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. Wait, what did I just read? Now, nevertheless, though, it would be wonderful to locate a detailed interview about the lost pages or heaven. Oh, wait, okay. Even if the source purporting to be the Book of Lehi manuscript or a transcription of an interview about it emerged, such a source would need to be tested to ensure that it was genuine. And in addition, a physical test, it would necessarily be tested using the very same data about the Book of Lehi's contents that we are examining here. Only a document consisting with the extant fragment of Book of Lehi narrative could be deemed authentic. There is a great deal of extant data relevant to the content of the lost pages. The historian tasked on this subject is to use that data inferentially to craft better and better models and increasingly approximate the contents of the Book of Lehi. Once reconstructive models have been crafted and presented, these can be modified, replaced, or otherwise improved on, both by the present author and future scholars. In this spirit, I offer the following work of reconstruction, which, with this and the above methodological considerations in mind, let us begin our work of modeling or reconstructing select narratives and narrative elements from the Book of Lehi. Lehi's Tabernacle. As numerous scholars have noted, Lehi is a new Moses, and his Exodus recapitulates the Exodus. And his Exodus recapitulates the Exodus. Many of the Moses and Exodus echoes in the Lehi story are readily visible. For instance, long before Lehi encountered God in a pillar of fire, Moses encounters God within flames in Sinai burning bush and experienced the divine presence as a pillar of fire during the wandering of the Exodus. So dramatic as it was, Lehi's fiery night vision of God and angels was not something entirely new, but the reigniting of an ember from the saga of Moses. Lehi can frequently be seen in the Book of Mormon narrative to follow in the footsteps of Moses. And when he does not follow Moses' footsteps, he backtracks in them. Lehi understands his journey away from Moses' promised land as an exodus to a new promised land. One element of the biblical Exodus narrative reportedly recapitulates by Lehi is the building of the tabernacle to worship Israel God in the wilderness. The narrative of Lehi's tabernacle is not recounted in the extant Book of Mormon text. Rather, Lehi's construction of a tabernacle is reported by Fayette Lapalm from his interview with Joseph Smith Sr. This account narrates that after Nephi returned from obtaining Laban's record, the family then moved on for several days when they were directed to stop and get material to make brass plates upon which to keep a record of their journey, also to erect a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire once they became bewildered or at a loss what to do. After all things were ready, they started on their journey in earnest. A gold ball went before them, having two pointers, one pointing steadily the way they should go, the other the way to where they could get provisions and other necessities. Hold on. Hold on. Some elements of this account are familiar from the extant Book of Mormon narrative. Others are obviously garblings of what is the extant narrative. Are the other elements that are neither familiar nor garbled and that might contrary narratives from the Book of Lehi? Before we assess the various details of this account and what it might tell us about the lost narrative, let us access the source from which it is taken. Fayette Lapalme's interview with Joseph Smith Sr., a key source of lost manuscript content. One of the few historical texts that has been suggested as a possible source of lost pages content is Fayette Lapalme's account of an interview with Joseph Smith Sr. The interview, Palmyra business Fayette Lapalme, along with the interviewer, Palmyra businessman Fayette Lapalme, along with his brother-in-law Jacob Ramsdell, visited the Smith household in neighboring Manchester shortly before the Book of Mormon came off the press early in 1830. Lapalme published an extensive account of this interview, mostly narrated by Joseph Smith Jr.'s reported recovery and translation of the golden plates in the historical magazine in 1870. Despite the lapse of years and the account's occasional evident garbling of facts, Lapalme's narration is filled with inside information that demonstrates his reliance on a source close to Joseph Smith Jr. For example, Lapalme's account is the earlier of only two historical sources to correctly identify the order in which Joseph Smith dictated the content of the Book of Mormon. Hold on. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Hold on 1 second. Hold on. 1 second, guys. After the theft of the initial Book of Mormon manuscript, Joseph Smith could have picked up this dictation at one of 2 points where he had left off in narrative. After the theft of the initial Book of Mormon manuscript, Joseph Smith could have picked up his dictation of one of 2 points. One, where he left off in the narrative in the Book of Mosiah, or 2, at the beginning of the Book of Lehi's replacement in the first Book of Nephi. Until the late 20th century, students of the Book of Mormon generally assumed Smith had picked up the dictation at its new chronological beginning in First Nephi, but in the 1990s, textual critics found firm evidence that Smith had resumed the dictation where he had left off in the Book of Mosiah. Joseph Smith's sister Catherine had reported as much in an unpublished 1893 interview. However, Fayette Lapalme had revealed the order of dictation 23 years earlier in his published interview with Joseph Smith Sr. The transcribers were to begin where they left off. Hold on. A number of such corroborating details have led to the most careful analysis of this document to date, Mark Ashurst McGee, to conclude that Lapalme wrote his interview account from notes recorded at the time of his interview with Smith Sr. Whether Lapalme's source was interview notes or an extraordinary memory, his accuracy on many obscure but confirmable information lends credence to additional unique details he provides. After relating Joseph Smith Sr.'s report of the history of the Book of Mormon, Lapalme also relates Smith Sr.'s report of the history in the Book of Mormon, its narrative, and it's here that this account becomes relevant to the present inquiry. At the time of their interview, before the Book of Mormon was available in print, such direct communications with someone close to the Book of Mormon dictation process was the only way that outsiders could have learned the Nephite story. The prophet's father obligingly related to his visitors portions of his narrative. In relating this history, the interview account largely retells familiar Book of Mormon stories, yet at key points, it also adds to the narrative covering the lost pages period, elements not found in the extant Book of Mormon text. These additional pieces of Nephite narrative, though new, fit remarkably well into the familiar narrative, suggesting that they are not the confabulations of faulty memory, but echoes of actual Book of Mormon narratives from the lost pages. In the interview report, Joseph Smith Sr. gives nearly 5 times as much space to the period of the narrative covered by the lost pages as it does to the slightly longer period that follows. It is as if Smith realized his hearers would not be able to read the fuller early Neophyte narrative given in the Book of Lehi manuscript, attempted to provide more than early narrative than the published book would provide. Indeed, I will argue that this is the most probable explanation for the additional Nephite narrative given in this Joseph Smith Sr. interview. Over and over, LaPalme's interview accounts provides narrative details for the lost pages periods that are not found in our present text, but that both cohere remarkably with it and illuminate the extant narrative. For example, the interpreters are arguably the most significant sacred relics mentioned in the Book of Mormons, aside from the golden plates themselves. But as discussed in detail below, a few scholars have noted that the extant Book of Mormon narrative offers no account of how the Nephites acquired the relics. Napalm's interview account, as we will see, Lapalm's interview account, as we will see, offers just such an account, filling a gap in the extant narrative. It is significant for assembling his account to know that Fayette Lapalme was never a believer in Mormonism and appears never to have read the Book of Mormon. Lapalme stated carefully that he and his companions came from his interview with Joseph Smith Sr. firmly convinced that we had smelt a large mice, that is, a rat. This conclusion that the Book of Mormon was a hoax obviated the need to read it. Had Lapalme read even the first pages, he almost certainly would have not placed the story's opening at the time of the Exodus, and he likely would have recalled the names of at least one character. Given the lack of familiarity with the published book, Lapalme should not have been able to identify what was missing from its narrative and construct narratives that fill those gaps and fit the general pattern of the Book of Mormon narrative. Rather, Lapalme acquired those new pieces of books of narratives the same way he acquired his initial information about the book's emergence from one who knew details of the Book of Mormon's emergence, the lost content. Wow. Okay, I'm finding this and Billy Crone fascinating, but I am finding this fascinating. This Mormon. Okay, let's watch Billy Crone. Hold on.
Amen. Hey, that's right. We are once again in our study, World Religions, Cults, and the Occult. And we are on topic number 8. It rhymes with Mormonism. Is absolutely correct, Bobby. I'll give you some gum possibly later. But that's right. And by way of recap, as you turn in your workbook, for absolutely no reason at all. That's right, if you want to do that, because we're not going to be into it tonight. We've already seen by way of recap, if the whole thing is started, Mormonism is based on a faulty premise, on a feeling, right? You don't gauge truth on a feeling, James 1:5. Plus, it was actually completely taken out of context, so it's doubly wrong. And then we took a look at the accounts. Well, which account? There's all kinds of different counts, different versions, different visions, different appearances, different what? And none of it makes sense, and it even not only disagrees the account, but even the writings. The Book of Mormon doesn't even agree with the other writings, and we'll talk about one later about that tonight. It doesn't live up to the archaeological evidence. There's zero evidence of any of their people, these weaponry, the mummies, and all the things that they say. There's no evidence, not one shred. And then we saw, what does Mormon mean? We'll get into that a little bit again tonight. It means she monster. It's like a term used for a spirit, a specter, a boogeyman back in the day, believe it or not. And then, of course, extremely racist. And then last time we saw getting into the occult ties. We're going to see that again, Lord willing, tonight. And so we looked at the question, was Joseph Smith, number one, a martyr? No, we took a look at the historical record, and who was it that shot him? Mormons. Okay, shot him, and we'll see later, it's because a lot of it was because of him sleeping with their wives, and, hey, go on a trip, pal, and once that guy's gone, he takes his wife, and it's really bad. So anyway, so that's not true. He's not a martyr, okay, as they would say, a lamb led to the slaughter, right? Just trying to share the truth. That's not true at all, and that's historical record. Last time we saw in great detail, speaking of the occult, they are just, he basically... I used to say he was a good storyteller. It was not even a good storyteller. Basically, what we're going to see again tonight is Joseph Smith was a massive plagiarist. Okay, he's just grabbing every kind of stuff from his things, and again, one of the big sources he ripped off from was Freemasonry. Even these so-called secret temple rites, there's nothing secret about it. He took them straight out of Freemasonry. He was a Freemason. His family was in Freemasonry. 1,500 Mormons were Freemasons in Nauvoo in the original beginning part, and he just went to the Freemasonry ritual, and just a few weeks later, he comes out with his own ritual, right? It's absolutely crazy. This guy just took a little bit of this, a little bit of that, took this, and we're going to see, again, even more so tonight. And we're going to see he took a whole bunch from witchcraft, okay? From witchcraft, okay? It gets worse as you go, okay? It's like those people when they want you to say that, oh, chicken's wonderful, and you take that first bite and you go, man, something is wrong. But then you just keep going, and you keep going, and it gets worse. Next thing you know, Tom's in the hospital visiting you. Hey, Pastor Billy, let me give you an update on Bobby. He didn't listen, but it's just like that. It's bad. Worse you go, man. But let's take a look at the witchcraft, okay? Now, it wasn't just that Joseph Smith was involved in witchcraft. He was led into it, guess by who? His family. It was a family. It wasn't just involved in witchcraft. It was a family affair, okay? And we see that, and this is all recorded history. Let's begin to take a look at that. Joseph Smith's family had been involved in witchcraft for generations, okay? And it was well known that his family was well known for, here's their reputation, right? Everybody's got a reputation as a family. Well, look at that family there. Oops. The Smith family was well known for consulting the dead, using divining rods, scrying. Scrying, if you recall, is like when you look in a pool of water or something like that, and you get some vision, kind of like a crystal ball type effect, if you will. Also using hallucinogenic drugs. It was the same thing that Nostradamus used. Okay, remember that? Okay, his family did that, scrying. That's in witchcraft. And they were known for that and throughout the area. And so it only stood to reason that they passed it down to guess who? Joseph Smith, the son. Okay, but let's take a look before we get into witchcraft. Is that something we should be messing around with? Absolutely not. Open your Bibles to Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19, right? And Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Leviticus 19. One verse, God's going down through a whole litmus things. He's given various laws. And Leviticus 19, verse 31, God throws this one out here. I don't know how much more blunt you can be. He clearly says, don't mess with this stuff. But verse 31, here's what God says. Do not turn to who? Mediums, or seek out what? Spiritists. And that's what his whole family was. As we're going to see, it was a family practice. They made money from this. Medium, spiritists, okay? For you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Now, fast forward a little bit, a couple books to Deuteronomy. Let's go to Deuteronomy, the classic text there with 18. We've seen that several times in previous studies, but let's nail it in to this study, especially since we're dealing with witchcraft in Mormonism tonight. Deuteronomy 18, verse 9. Once again, God's warning the people. Okay, and here's what he says. Verse 9, when you enter the land the Lord your God has given you, do not learn to imitate the what ways? Acceptable ways? No, detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Why? Because anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable practices, the Lord your God is going to drive out those nations, etc., etc. That's why they're being judged. That's why they're being driven out. God says, don't do it. You belong to me. Don't you ever have anything to do with witchcraft. Well, that's what basically not only is the root and the family history of Joseph Smith, but it's also the means of which he supposedly translated the Book of Mormon. He's using witchcraft techniques. It's wrong all the way around. But let's continue with that. Joseph Smith Sr., his dad, okay, was known for having visions. And we've talked about that before in our Hinduism study and New Age study. When somebody comes out, I had a vision from God, and God told me to tell you, run. Run. Just stick with the Bible. Okay? But he was known for having visions, and he never hesitated to share his experiences with others when he was given the chance. His wife, Lucy, recorded no less than 7 dreams that he had, Joseph Sr., from the time their first son was born. And it just so happens, one of those dreams from the dad was remarkably very similar to the dream that a main character in the Book of Mormon, Lehi, had in the Book of Mormon. I'm sure that's a quinky dink. Are you kidding me? We're going to see, man, even more so tonight. He's just taking this, taking that, taking contemporary, Freemasonry, witchcraft. I'll make this up. The guy slapped it all together. What a bunch of baloney. Okay, as we're going to see. And even got a little story from his dad. He's just making this up as we go. Now, the problem with Smith's family vocation, okay, witchcraft, is not only does obviously God condemn it, okay, but some of it was illegal. Okay, and we're going to see that he was actually brought to court for this, Joseph Smith. Okay, now in addition to the dreams of her husband, Lucy, the wife, Joseph Smith's mom, also wrote many of the times that they, as a family, relied on this, a brack. Okay, you got a brack. What's a brack? Okay, that's those things that you build walls with when you're from Boston. You know, stack of bracks all here, another brack over here. That's not what it is, Ruth, but I'd give you a golf clap there for that, trying what that is. No, a brack. But this, they relied on a brack. This a brack. The Joseph Smith family relied on a brack, quote, while looking for direction in life. Or you, what's a brack? A brack is short for what we will say today, abracadabra. Abracadabra, okay? Abracadabra is actually an incantation word that's used in the occult, okay? And that's what they were relying upon. And it's from her own words, okay? And that, by the way, abracadabra, known in the occult, is supposed to mean I create as I speak, okay? Is what that incantation is supposed to be about. Sounds like Word of Faith folks today, doesn't it? Yeah, wait till we get to that thing later. While calling upon spirits for guidance in many of the rituals they would have performed, circles were drawn in the ground using detailed instructions from 2 well-known books. So you and I would say, hey, I've been raised on the Bible. Well, Joseph Smith's family was raised on 2 occult books. The first one was called Discoveries, okay? Discoveries in Witchcraft, okay? And the other one was called the Magus, or Magus, however you want to pronounce that. Okay, Discovery in Witchcraft. It's not spelled, it's the Old English. If you want to look it up, not Discovery with Y, it's I-E. Discovery, I-E, in Witchcraft. Okay, and the Magus was the second one. The Discovery of Witchcraft book was more than 200 years old by the 1820s at the time of his family, but it was a staple, quote, in the lives of those practicing witchcraft. The circles included upside-down pentagrams. We saw that with Freemasonry. They still have it on their temples, even today, in other edifices we saw. And markings of the Jupiter talisman. Now, what in the world's that? Do you remember that? That was the thing that they found on the body of Joseph Smith when he was killed. He carried around with him this Jupiter talisman. Jupiter talisman was kind of like a good luck charm for wealth and fortune. Okay, but it wasn't just that. On his Jupiter talisman, they also found markings from that book called the Magus, the witchcraft book. So he even had that on his possession when he died. And he didn't renounce any of this stuff. Okay, the witchcraft that he and his family was involved in. The book also gave specific times, and this is the Discovery Witchcraft, the specific times when a person should pray for a personal manifestation of the spirits, right? And it should be noted that the perfect time, according to this book, that Joseph Smith's family had on witchcraft, discovery, i.e. in witchcraft, okay, the perfect time, if you want to have a spirit appear, is at midnight on September 21st. That's the autumn equinox. And guess what? That just happens to be when Joseph Smith was praying, supposedly in 1823, and he got his manifestation. And according to the witchcraft book, that's the number one time you need to. Isn't that wild? And we're just getting started. There's so many weird connections with witchcraft. It's crazy. Now, to make matters worse, the Jupiter talisman that Smith had in his pocket when he died, again, it contained drawings from the Magus. The book, the Magus, is nothing more, the second book, than a resource, a how-to guide for ceremonial magic, alchemy, astrology, and the Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah, the mysticism. Okay, we talked about before in some of our other studies. Joseph Smith admits that he practiced in the historical record these questionable practices. Okay, so it wasn't like he was trying to hide from it. What we're going to see tonight is, guess who's trying to hide us from this history? Everybody. They're redoing the artwork and they're trying to deny the historical archives and all that stuff. But let's continue on. So Joseph Smith and his father, again, this was a family involved. They passed it on to his son. This is the house he grew up in, but it was also a family practice. Witchcraft was the Smith family practice. Now, they didn't say, hey, come to our house, we're witches. No, the term that was used back in the day, and the Mormons will even use this when you talk about his spurious past, okay? It was a practice called money digging, okay? But money digging, all it is a term to use occult techniques, witchcraft, to find buried treasure that's supposed to be guarded by spirits, right? So that's what his family was in. You call it money digging, and see, most people don't get it because it doesn't say witchcraft, but they used, that was witchcraft. Money digging was a person who involved in witchcraft, a spiritist, a medium, right? And they'll even admit that. Okay, but they were noticing that, and they were involved with special ritual ceremonies that were performed for the purpose of obtaining buried treasure thought to be guarded by evil spirits. This was their family business. Okay, accounts of money digging might sound weird today, but it was big back in the late 1700s, 1800s, and as was documented, listen, this is from their own camp, LDS seminary teacher Grant Palmer documents that Smith's family's occult beliefs and practices, as well as their close associates. The whole family was involved in this. Joseph Smith Jr.'s role in quest for treasure was especially important since he had another article from witchcraft that they used in this witchcraft technique, but witchcraft in general. And that article for witches to use, those involved in that, was called a seer stone. Okay, a seer stone, and they're trying to cover that up again today. We'll see that tonight. And what he would do is he would place a small so-called special rock, seer stone, also called a peep stone, okay, into a hat, and then he would pull up the hat to his face and block out all the light. And by doing this, he could see, supposedly, supernaturally, and would help those who were digging, okay, looking for treasure. By this technique, he could tell them where it was located, okay, by observing the spirits in his hat, the spirits that were guarding it, right? By the way, that's witchcraft. That's witchcraft, if you will, 101 back in the day. They would take a witchcraft stone, a supposed magic rock, they would stick it into a hat, and then they would put it up to their face so it would block out all light, and all of a sudden you're starting to get visions. And that's what they used to tell, hey, Bob, dig over here. I can see this. And that's how his money, the family made a living. Okay, they made cash off this. Now, you know what technique he used to supposedly translate the Book of Mormon? The exact same thing. It's witchcraft. He used witchcraft to, oh boy, are they trying to cover this up. Okay, it's witchcraft 101. Okay, now, Joseph Smith Jr., again, himself admitted to being a money digger and that he and his family did this until at least 1826. Okay, on March 20th of that year, he was also, Joseph Smith, arrested, brought before a judge, and charged as being a glass looker, a disorderly person, one who pretended to have the skills in the areas of palmistry, telling fortunes, and discovering where lost goods might be found. And he used witchcraft the whole time. And according to the records, Justice Neely determined that Joseph Smith was guilty. It's court record. They got it today. And then shortly after this, Joseph Smith, after he went to court and got in trouble for it, he, quote, discontinued money digging, but guess what he kept? he kept the seer stone. Okay? And it was with the seer stone that he claimed to find the golden plates and again to produce the Book of Mormon. Now let's take a look at some of that historical record. Everybody knows, if you're honest with history, that the Smith family was involved in witchcraft. So let's take a look at our first video tonight.
Numerous accounts from Smith family supporters, detractors, and neighbors describe a family that was very involved in magical practices, including soothsaying, rod divining, circle drawing, and most importantly, seer stones and money digging. While digging a well in 1820, Joseph Smith found what he believed to be a seer stone, a magical rock that basically worked like a crystal ball. It would be placed in a hat, then the user would place their face in the hat and magically see things. Using this method as a guide, money diggers would then hire themselves out to people to search for treasure buried by pirates or Spaniards on their land. Usually, however, the treasure was cursed and would sink back into the ground so that it could never quite be unearthed. Joseph Smith was well known in his community as a money digger. In fact, he met his future wife, Emma Hale, while on a money digging job. Her father did not approve of the marriage because of his dubious profession, so they eloped. LDS defenders used to contend that there was absolutely no credence in the accounts of Joseph Smith's magical career, even though his own mother attested to it. Smith himself insisted that they were just rumors that sprang up because he was once hired to help locate and dig a silver mine by non-magical means. But that changed in 1971, when documents from 1826 surfaced detailing Smith's arrest as a glass looker. It turned out that the same man from the silver mine story that Smith had referred to actually testified in court that Smith had defrauded him on at least 3 occasions in money-digging schemes. Now, LDS historians generally agree that Smith was involved in money digging, but defend him with the claim that this was culturally accepted and even respected at the time. This, of course, begs the question as to why then Smith was arrested and brought to court for practicing it. There are further claims that the Smith family did not consider these practices to be witchcraft, but rather as some kind of extension of their genuine Christian faith in the Bible. However, these dealings are nowhere to be found in the Bible as legitimate Christian practices. 1 year after his arrest in 1820, Joseph Smith claimed to have come into possession of golden plates, which he dug out of a hillside. Using his seer stone, he then translated the writing on the plates, and 3 years later, published it as the Book of Mormon. It is interesting to note that Smith never renounced any of the magical practices that he and his family performed.
And what he used to translate supposedly the Book of Mormon. A seer stone, witchcraft practices. Okay? And that's the history that they are desperately trying to cover up. It's witchcraft through and through. In fact, it reminds you of this. Can you believe that guy? You see the picture of the guy with the hat? Light supposed to be shining, whatever. You know, it reminds me of the one time, maybe I'll get to this later when we get to the part where it talks about witnessing, how to witness. And I used to witness to Mormons in Sacramento, and I had this one guy that came, and there was 2 elders, and then I think I was getting to the one elder, and he never showed back up, but they brought the elder, right, that last time, and they didn't come back after this. And but they were trying to bribe me. It was sad. You weren't getting nowhere. But they tried to bribe me with riches. And again, you see the whole background. This is money, money, money. And this one guy, I kid you not, he's out there and he's pointing to the elder who's standing there in this nice suit and everything, right? And he goes, do you realize that elder so-and-so, he owns 25 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants? And I'm going, dude, you have no idea. First of all, you're not going to bribe me with riches, okay, to turn from Christ. Second of all, you know, of all, Pizza Hut, maybe no. I mean, come on.
Okay. Hello? Hold on. Hello? Hello? Ah.
Oh, hello? Okay, good. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Okay, Lampom's tabernacle narrative. Having glimpsed that Fayette Lampom's account of his Joseph Smith Sr. interview has evident basis in fact, let us now closely examine what Lampom reports Smith Sr. saying about Lehi's tabernacle as quoted earlier. Hold on. I just have to answer something every once in a while. Get material. Get materials to make brass plates upon which to keep a record of their journey, also to erect a tabernacle, wherein they could go and inquire whenever they become bewildered or at a loss what to do. After all things were ready, they started on their journey, and in earnest a gold ball went before them, having two patterns, one pointing steadily the way they should go, the other the way to where they could get provisions and other necessaries. Comparing this with the extant Lehi narrative, it appears that Lapalm garbled some of what he heard. Even when Lapalm may have misinterpreted the narrative elements he gives are, which with one exception, the construction of the tabernacle, known elements of the Lehi narrative. The brass plates are, of course, part of the narrative, but were not an additional item Lehi needed after acquiring Laban's record. They were Laban's record. Lapalm correctly describes the Liahona as a ball with two spindles that pointed the way for Lehi to travel in the wilderness, but he connects the balls of the brass of the balls with the gold of the plates Nephi makes and is confused about how the ball functions. He envisions the Liahona guiding Lehi's band by moving in front of them as the biblical pillar of cloud had guided Moses, people during the Exodus, rather than pointing the way they should travel. Lapalm's narrative twists about the construction of a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire differs from these other variances from the known narrative. This new detail could not have resulted in any evident way from combining or misconstruing other known elements of that narrative. The tabernacle detail adds something not found in the extant Book of Mormon text. Hold on. This is like a little bit of hard reading, but hold on a second. Does the narrative presented in Lapalm's interview with Joseph Smith Sr. of Lehi's tabernacle thus offer otherwise lost details of Lehi's exodus? In this portion of the chapter, I will identify evidence, mostly in the extant text, that supports Lehi having built a wilderness tabernacle. Evidence for Lehi's tabernacle. Any makeshift tabernacle Lehi's family could construct on their journey would have to be imagined as small and meager compared to the elaborate biblical tabernacle. Yet the narrative of Lehi's constructing a tabernacle would mirror Moses' construction of the tabernacle in the biblical Exodus, and so fit the larger pattern of Lehi's narrative, which recapitulates the Exodus. Given the pattern of Lehi's Exodus on the biblical Exodus, his buildings of a tabernacle seem a natural development, a next step in the Exodus pattern. A narrative of Lehi constructing a tabernacle would also continue another larger pattern, visible in the extant text of Lehi and Nephi progressively replacing the Jerusalem temple. In the extant text, they first build an altar and later a temple explicitly patterned on the one in Jerusalem. The building of a tabernacle fits that pattern and adds a transitional step between standalone altar and temple. This progressive sequence is also consistent with the known narrative's characterization of Lehi as a new Moses and of Nephi as a new David and Solomon. Okay. The extant narrative shows Nephi as relic bearer and temple builder, stepping into the shoes of David, who brought the tabernacle's sacred relics to the future temple city, and also into the shoes of Solomon, who constructed the temple. For Lehi, who is frequently framed as a new Moses elsewhere in the narrative, who have constructed a tabernacle, would be for Lehi to act as Moses to Nephi's David and Solomon, and again fits a larger pattern. Another reason the construction of the tabernacle fits into the Lehi narrative and would be expected is the text's insistence that the Lehites scrupulously observe the law of Moses, which requires a sanctuary for the fulfillment of its ritual observance. During their exodus, Lehi and family could only meet this requirement by creating a portable temple like Moses' wilderness sanctuary, the tabernacle. Lastly, moving beyond Lastly, moving beyond inferential evidence, we have the narrative of Lehi's tabernacle from Fayette Lapalm, who demonstratively conveys inside information and particularly details his narrative of the Book of Lehi time period. Given how well the narrative provided by Lapalm fits the pattern of Book of Mormon narrative, despite Lapalm's own apparent unfamiliarity with the book demonstrated by his omission of names and conflations of narrative, Lapalm's narrative that Lehi constructed a tabernacle probably perpetuates a detail conveyed to him by Joseph Smith Sr. from the Book of Lehi. Hold on. Nephi's temple and ark. One way in which the Book of Lehi slash Book of Mormon narrative both follows the pattern of biblical Israel and lays down a pattern for proto-Zionism is that Nephi builds a temple and gathers a set of temple relics. The construction of Nephi's temple occurs in a part of the small plates that severely compresses historical narrative. Given several things we know of the Book of Lehi, that it gave a more detailed narrative history, that it was more Hebraic, and that it spoke more about sacred space, ritual worship, and relics. For example, the narrative of Lehi's tabernacle above and a tabernacle above and Mosiah's interpreters below. We should expect it to have substantially detailed more about Nephi's temple. Hold on. Hold on. Um, okay. Wait, let me read this again. Nephi's temple and an ark. One way in which the Book of Lehi, Book of Mormon narrate follows the pattern of biblical Israel and lays down a pattern for proto-Zionism is that Nephi builds a temple and gathers a set of temple relics. Okay, never mind. We already read that. While there's not much we can definitely say was in the lost manuscript about Nephi's temple, there are things we can infer about the Nephite temple system using the extant text and some extant evidence that the more detailed and Judaic Book of Lehi was likely to include. There is a fair amount we will be able to say before about the relics associated with Nephi's temple that was likely said explicitly in the Book of Lehi, and there is little, albeit only a little, we can say that was probably in the Book of Lehi about the actual temple itself. The Nephite narrative in the lost manuscript probably shows him using a tabernacle until his temple was complete. His temple was modeled on the biblical first temple, Solomon's temple, likely the level of having a holy of holies and repository slash altar with the inner sanctum to take the place of the biblical Ark of the Covenant. And 3, this temple was likely referred to in the text as the Temple of Nephi. Hold on. Um, Okay. The Nephi initially uses a tabernacle. That initially uses a tabernacle is likely from the precedent set by his father, as reported by Fayette Lapalm by Joseph Smith Sr., and from Nephi's emphasis, even in the not so Judaic extant text, on keeping the Mosaic law, which would have required the use of provisional sanctuary, a tabernacle, until the permanent sanctuary, the temple, was complete. Nephi's use of a tabernacle is made even more likely by a story about Messiah's tabernacle and reconstructed below, which gives us a Book of Lehi pattern in which a tabernacle is used while a permanent temple is unavailable. The patterning of Nephi's temple on Solomon's temple is explicit in the book of Lehi's extant small plates replacement. And I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things, for they were not to be found upon the land, wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple, but the manner of the construction was like unto the temple of Solomon, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. This brief description offers no detail about the inner structure of the Nephi temple in terms of the layout of sacred space, but both both Nephi's temple on the temple being with but both Nephi's emphasis on the temple being within practical constraints after the manner of Solomon's, and his instance on other passages that he and his people kept the Mosaic law punctiliously, imply that his temple is to be understood as having a sacred space necessary to meet the law's requirements. Most prominent among such spaces would be the Holy of Holies, which in Solomon's temple imitated by Nephi, contained the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant there functioned firstly as a repository for relics believed to be imbued with God's presence. Moses's divinely touchstone tablets, the miraculous manna from heaven, and the blossom rod of Aaron, and which served as memorials of God's mercy to the Israelites on their exodus. And it functioned secondly as an altar to the Day of Atonement, when the high priest would sprinkle sacrificial blood on it. A Nephite temple structure spelled out on the line of Solomon's temple, as described in Hebraic Bible, would therefore include a Holy of Holies and an Ark equivalent to serve as both divine reliquary and sacrificial altar. Hold on one second. Hold on. Okay. The third insight can be drawn about the first Nephi temple in the book of Lehi is that it was likely denominated the Temple of Nephi. Nephi calls the first temple the Temple of Solomon. This non-biblical term would establish the book of Lehi, Book of Mormon precedent for naming temples after the king who had them built. And we find Martin Harris, who had been exposed to the book of Lehi's own terminology for his first temple, telling others about the Temple of Nephi. Other evidence, we will review next, suggests that the Nephite temple system was represented implicitly in the extant text, more likely explicitly in the lost text, including a substitute for the Ark of the Covenant and its associated relics. A new ark, as argued about above, given that the Book of Lehi is indicated to be more historically detailed and Old Testament in character than its extant replacement, it stands to reason that elements of Nephite temple system and temple worship that men may be absent from or implicit in the extant text would have been more explicitly detailed in the book of Lehi. To read carefully and fleshing out what is implicit about the Nephite temple system in the extant text is thus one way of identifying elements that were probably laid out more clearly in the lost texts. Examining implicit clues in the extant text. About Nephi equivalents to the biblical relics of the Ark of Covenant, and the high priest provides a prime opportunity to identify elements of the Book of Lehi's temple narrative. Hold on. We have seen in our previous chapter that early Mormons identified the same box from which Joseph Smith reported taking the golden plates as an ark. The stone box, as described, would have also made a serviceable altar. The top stone that acted as the lid was reportedly thick and rounding in the middle on the upper lid and thinner towards the edge, so that when it was buried, the middle part of it was visible above the ground, while the edges all around were covered with earth. We have also seen that the Mormons' ark mirrored the pattern of the biblical ark, and as real mirrors do, reversed it. Instead of an ark of gold bearing tables of stone, the Mormon's box was an ark of stone bearing tables of gold. Yet the golden plates are not the only Ark of the Covenant and associated relics in the Nephite narrative. There are other relics that are gathered by the Nephites in the story of Lehi and Nephi, which was first told in the book of Lehi. These also systematically parallel the memorials of the Exodus associated with the biblical Ark of the Covenant. The brass ball compass, or Liahona, parallels the pot of manna and Aaron's rod with budded, two relics from the Exodus narratives that the biblical epistle to the Hebrews places inside the ark. The sword of Laban parallels the sword of Goliath, which becomes part of the peripheral association with the biblical high priest. Wait, hold on. The Liahona found by Lehi was a compass or divinatory pointing device that revealed the will of God. The Liahona parallels the pot of manna and Aaron's rod both in function and in how it enters the narrative. Aaron's rod that budded was a staff used for divinatory purposes. Manna, which the Israelites found in round clumps on the ground each morning, provided their sustenance during the exodus of their Canaanite promised land. Similarly, the Liahona pointed the way to food and Lehi's New World promised land. And Lehi found this round ball on the ground in the morning, just as the Israelites did the manna. The sword of Goliath was used by the young David to behead the owner Goliath. In a parallel story, Nephi beheads Laban with his own sword and takes the sword. Several scholars, include Noel Reynolds and Benjamin McGuire, have examined how the story of Nephi and Laban parallels that of David and Goliath. McGuire have found distinctive phrasing from David and Goliath narrative in the Nephi and Laban narrative, and found several thematic elements of the David and Goliath narrative that repeat in the same order in the narrative of Nephi and Laban. The sword of Goliath is probably not familiar to many readers as a temple or tabernacle relic, but its preservation in the tabernacle is attested in 1 Samuel's narrative of David's flight from Saul. When David enters the tabernacle for asylum and asks the high priest Amalek for a sword to defend himself, Saul's men Amalek answers, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah. Behold it here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod, and the ephod being the vestment on which the high priest wore the breastplate within which the Urim and the Thummim were placed." Later in the Nephite narrative, even a parallel of the Urim and Thummim appear in the form of the interpreters, which also accompanied a breastplate, and which, by virtue of having been touched by God, also parallel the stones residing in the biblical Ark of the Covenant. Hold on. Thus, Nephi temple appears to have been understood by earlier Mormons to have included a stone ark paralleling the biblical Ark of the Covenant. This ark was understood to bear sacred relics that we can systematically parallel with the sacred relics of the biblical high priest and Ark of the Covenant. The Nephite temple system, implicit in the extant narrative and more likely to have been made explicit in the lost narrative, is modeled down to the level of its ark and high priestly relics on the system of the first temple in Jerusalem. In it, Nephi, who constructs the first Nephite temple and this system by establishing himself as a new world successor to the temple builder Solomon, builds a temple directly patterned on Solomon's in a new Jerusalem and compiling his own set of sacred relics and memorials parallel to those in the Ark of the Covenant. Nephi establishes Jewish temple worship after the fall of Solomon's temple and sets a pattern that would be used by Mormon proto-Zionists eager to establish Jewish temple worship in their day. Okay, I know people hate when I read, but all right, let's listen to Billy Crone.
I couldn't believe it. What are the odds, right? But then I got to thinking as I was watching that with the hat and the thing with there, maybe that's what they do with those Kentucky Fried Chicken buckets. But that's a joke. I'm joking. Let's move on and get serious. But it does make sense if you think about it. But anyway, so witchcraft connection was known by early converts, but okay, after this, of course, so he didn't denounce it. You study the history; it's obvious. He's even in court records. He got in trouble. He went to court over this witchcraft charge, and then early accounts you couldn't escape it. Okay, and then that's when all of a sudden his encounter with the methodologies of witchcraft, all of a sudden with this Moroni thing, turned into not a spirit, but an angel. Right, and that's when they began to start to kind of backtrack, and we better try to distance a little bit from the obvious witchcraft techniques. This transition, trying to make it more palatable of his whole account that was involving witchcraft, was aided by the fact that Moroni, again we saw before, he's supposed to be a dead American Indian warrior, right? Remember, they're supposed to be Mormons are supposed to be the descendants of the American Indians, which there's zero DNA evidence, so that's another lie. There's no evidence, okay? But this Moroni that he encountered is supposed to be a dead American Indian warrior who's the son of a guy named Mormon, hence supposed the Book of Mormon, right? And but he referred to him as an angel. Well, first of all, you got a problem with that even happened and it didn't, okay? Can dead people, as we saw before, become angels? No, angels are a whole separate deal. Right, so the whole thing's a bunch of baloney, but you can see them begin to backpedal and start. I better not say spirit because then people's glasses look at hat and witchcraft and talisman and it's an angel. That sounds better, doesn't it? Right, and that's what they. But this is from their own camp. A BYU professor says this: during this period, from 1827 to 1830, Joseph Smith abandoned the company of his former money-digging associates, but he continued to use them for quote religious purposes. The brown seer stone that he had previously employed in the treasure quest. His most intensive and productive use of the seer stone was in the translation of the Book of Mormon. And he also dictated supposedly several revelations with this stone. Another LDS author, Richard Wagner, found, quote, this stone, this witchcraft stone, the seer stone, okay, still retained by the first presidency of the LDS Church, was the vehicle through which the golden plates were discovered and the medium through which the interpretation came. Thus, quote, historians, even in their own camp, have documented the continuity between Joseph's early occult practices and the origins of Mormonism. So even their own camp, they got to admit, what did the guy use to bring this whole thing about? Witchcraft. Witchcraft. Serious stuff, okay? Now, let's get a little bit more into how did he do this supposed translation using this witchcraft technique, a seer stone, peep stone, whatever you want to call it, okay? Because that's what it was. Let's take a look. The founder of the LDS Church, Joseph Smith, claimed that an angel Moroni visited him in September 1823. This so-called heavenly messenger is reported to tell him about these gold plates that contained a record of the former inhabitants that were on this continent that the American Indians are supposed to be a descendant of, Again, no evidence. And from the source from which they sprang. The place were said to be containing the fullness of the everlasting gospel. Right? And of course, it contained on plates language in Reformed Egyptian. And once again, it's not Egyptian, it's Reformed Egyptian, just to further confuse you, apparently. But we'll get to that again later. But again, he used this witchcraft stone, the seer stone. The method in which Joseph Smith translated the golden plates has been the source of the highest interest to many people who've studied the origins of the LDS movement. Yeah, I'd say so. Listen, while many paintings and pictures used in Mormon visitor centers and books depict a prayerful Smith leaning over the plates. See, this is where they start to rewrite their own history. So when they show Joseph Smith, he's this clean-cut dude hopping. I don't know if you ever seen, have you ever seen, with all due respect, the actual photos of Joseph Smith back in the day? It's like a big giant man bun. And I can't talk too much because my hair is still back in the 80s. Right? But today they got, he's like, he's so innocent and pure looking. And supposedly this act of him with the translation, he's just prayerfully just looking at these plates. That's not really what's going on at all. This guy's using the peep stone, the seer stone, and the guys in his own camp who are the supposed witnesses even admit it. So they're completely rewriting their own history. Okay, let's take a look at what it was. It was a hat that he put over his face with the seer stone. That's how he brought it about. LDS historian quotes Martin Harris. Martin Harris is one of the three witnesses whose name is found in every edition of the Book of Mormon since its original edition. Harris said on record that Smith possessed a seer stone, quote, a chocolate-colored, somewhat egg-shaped stone, which the prophet found while digging a well with his brother Hiram. Roberts goes on to state that it was by using this stone that, quote, Joseph was able to translate the characters engraven on these plates. Martin Harris also said, and he was one who was also doing the transcribing, one of them. So he tells, this is what happens. He says, by aid of the seer stone, sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. So basically, he puts the witchcraft rock in the hat, slaps the hat up to his face, blocks out all light, and all of a sudden visions are supposed to appear. The other guy's over here as he's staring in the hat, okay? And then he's supposed to write the thing down. Now, as it appears, supposedly, right, as it appears, right, and then he calls it out, this guy, he writes it, he reads it back, supposedly, and if it was correct, supposedly it disappeared, and here came the next chunk, right? But this is from one of the three guys, historically, his account on record, that this is what he did. He put the rock in the hat, his head in the hat, and supposedly this is how it went. That's witness number one. It also concurs with another guy, David Whitmer, another one of the three witnesses that appears in the front of the Book of Mormon, and he tells how the stone produced the interpretation. Remember, the whole time, they don't have that in the artwork anymore. It's just him going like this, looking at the plates. No, he's using witchcraft. And here's Whitmer's account. He says, I will now give you a description of the manner in which the Book of Mormon was translated. Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat, put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness, the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, not the only one, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear. And another character with the interpretation would appear, quote, thus the Book of Mormon was translated not by any power of man. Yeah, it was used by witchcraft. So you got that part right. Smith's wife, Emma, also supported Harris and Whitmer's version of the story, recalling how her husband buried his face in the hat while she was serving as his scribe. And again, what's the premise of that? That's not just weird. It's when you look at the practice back in the day, money digging, that's what people in witchcraft did. They hired themselves out to do this, to find buried treasure. They used witchcraft. That's what he's using to bring about this Book of Mormon. Okay? So he got caught in court. He stopped that, we think. But then he used the same practice to develop this new religion called Mormonism. Joseph Smith's brother also confirmed that he used the hat and the seer stone, okay? Which also, it's something to think about this. Remember, he's the whole time, according to the witnesses that are even included in the Book of Mormon, the guys that were supposed to be right there with him, while he's doing this with the rock and the hat and the head in the hat, right? And then they're recording it. all these different scribes, and all their accounts say that's how he did it. I like what this person said. It leads you to wonder why Smith went through the bother of digging up the alleged golden plates if he didn't even have to look at them during the translation. Think about it, right? But doesn't that sound more spiritual? They weren't paper plates. They weren't even that nifty chinette that you pay extra at the store that's supposed to be more firm to hold the gravy. No, these were golden plates. I don't mean plate, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's right. Interestingly enough, the article in January 1997, okay, LDS Church publication Ensign, leaves out any mention of the hat and de-emphasizes the seer stone. In fact, LDS apostle Neil Maxwell, who authored the article, he quotes another apostle, Orson Pratt, from 1874, saying that Smith relied less and less upon the seer stones and more on how he learned how to translate. So even back then, they're realizing we got to start to distance ourselves. And to where today, it's a complete perversion of their own history of how they present this process of translation. But the guy says this, well, it seems odd that God would provide these instruments supposedly to translate and then allow the translator, the rock, then allow the translator to have more freedom as the translation went on. Why didn't you just do it that way from the start? So the whole thing falls apart because they're lying. They're trying to rewrite their own history. Okay, and again, it's curious that Maxwell makes no reference to the hat. In fact, a picture in this magazine, they show this Oliver Cowdery, one of the primary scribes, writing down the English translation while Smith appears to be translating. There's no sign of the so-called seer stones or the hat. As the guy says, quote, what could be the reason for leaving these items out of a publicity painting except to distance the translation from the occult practices that really did characterize the Book of Mormon translation? And it's called their lying, right? And they know that if people found out that the very core, this guy wasn't just involved in Freemasonry, he was a liar, he was a con artist, he was involved in witchcraft, his whole family was in witchcraft, they passed it on to him, but he's even using witchcraft techniques to come about this Book of Mormon. How many think people would join? So you better start redoing the paintings, Bob, right? Redoing the story, right? And we do the same thing as the church. Right? It's the old axiom, those who don't learn their history are doomed to repeat it. And I think one of our crimes as Christians, we don't even know our own history. Right? If we did know our own history, even recent history with the Reformation, what in the world are you doing backing up into the arms? We spent 12 weeks in our last study on Roman Catholicism. They murdered and killed and martyred our brothers and sisters in Christ just for bringing out the Bible. Right? But the same thing, they just, let's write off those folks. But this new generation, they have no clue. These nifty paintings, and wow, he looks so clean cut just looking at those plates. Right? And that's what they're doing. They're lying. Okay. The use of similar types of seer stones, peep stones were also called. They were quite common among believers in folk magic during the time of Joseph Smith. And there's plenty of evidence that the one whom Mormons claim to use to restore the true church was quite fascinated in the occult, as were the members of his immediate family. Okay. And they use the occult technique. But anyway, it says this: if so many witnesses testify to Smith's use of the hat and the magical rock, why don't the Mormon books and periodicals, for the sake of accuracy, emphasize that fact? Why do they show pictures of Smith translating from the plates and have him deep in thought rather than looking into the hat? Quote, in our opinion, earlier accounts are embarrassing to the LDS Church, and so a better, more faith-promoting account has been proposed. You know what that is? That's a fancy way of saying we're lying through our teeth. Because can you believe that? We'll talk about a twisting of words. Okay. In fact, they're flat out denying it now. Now they're really going against historical record. The 10th LDS president, Joseph Fielding Smith, quote, denied Joseph Smith even used a seer stone. Well, that's going against even the witnesses that are even mentioned in the Book of Mormon, let alone Joseph Smith himself. And quote, listen to this, the information is all hearsay. And personally, I do not believe that this stone was used for that purpose. You can believe that all you want. You can believe chicken's good for you. Doesn't make it true, right? Historically, we've got the facts. We got the court records, right? You can't hide from this. Apostle Maxwell, he said, listen to this. Here's the rationale. Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound good. Quote, our primary focus in studying the Book of Mormon should be on the principles anyway, not the process by which the book came forth. Yeah, we should be wondering about how it came forth, because what came forth came from witchcraft. You don't have nothing to do with it. Okay, absolutely crazy. The move away from the actual facts of the translation process demonstrates LDS leaders understand, quote, that most people would balk at accepting the Book of Mormon if it was known to have been translated using a magical rock in a hat. Dun, dun, dun. He's like, yeah, no kidding, right? Now, let's get into even further witchcraft connections there, and I gave you a little teaser last week, and that's even with this whole issue with Moroni. Now, Moroni can't be true anyway. He's supposed to be a supposedly dead person, supposedly a dead American Indian from his dad named Mormon, right? But dead people don't become angels. But again, angels was done just to try to soften it, because originally it was a spirit, right? Well, that doesn't sound good, especially with this witchcraft thing. So let's take a look. Even that name Moroni, where's that come from? Right? Well, let's take a look at that. According to the Book of Mormon, Moroni was the son of Mormon, from whom the Book of Mormon is named. Before Mormon's death in battle, he passed supposedly the golden plates to this guy named his son Moroni. Moroni then finished writing on the plates and concluded the record, presumably burying them in the hill Cumorah. There in western New York, not too far where I used to live. The image of the angel Moroni, if you'll notice, is pretty much all over the Mormon stuff. He's blown a trumpet. He's commonly used as a symbol of the LDS Church. He appears on some of the editions of the Book of Mormon, and got statues of this supposed angel, okay, standing atop of LDS temples, okay? But let's take a look at this name, Moroni. And again, this is the BYU professor. Says he suggests several possible origins for the name Moroni. Some say that on his first visit to the hill, Joseph saw a salamander, some say a toad. Okay, and this is part of some of the original accounts. And remember, the accounts keep changing, which we saw back in the first study, which account. But some accounts say the first thing he saw on this hill was a salamander, some say a toad, in the hole that he was led to that supposedly had the plates in it. And then that this salamander or toad transformed itself into a spirit, and this spirit struck Joseph Smith 3 times, which is an occult thing, by the way. Now, it's interesting. You go, well, that's strange. What happened to this? I thought it was, remember which account was it? I thought it was Jesus. No, I thought it was the Father in Jesus. No, I thought it was an angel. I thought it was this Moroni guy. Which is it? Right? But anyway, so the original one's this salamander toad-looking thing that was in the hole, then it pops out, becomes a spirit, and smacks you 3 times. That's weird. Okay? But Moroni and salamander are consistent with magic or witchcraft associations. Watch this. Early 19th century Americans, the name Moroni is simply an anagram for I moron. Right? I moron, you just switch the I, put the I at the front. Joseph put it at the back. Okay, was a widely published word for a being which poisons. Also, a poisonous salamander was moron in the scientific text of the day, and occult texts used salamanders to illustrate the elemental spirit of fire, and moron was also the name of magic invocations. So once again, dude, you didn't really stray too far to come up with this name, right? And according to the same guy, Moron is an incantation name used for treasure seeking. So you just took this old witchcraft spirit name, right? And then you did your little thing. In fact, we're not even there yet. I keep getting ahead of myself. There's just so much. And again, it just gets worse as you go. But you're going to see that he just took whole chunks of the Bible, whatever. He took Bible names, and he just would change. Oh, that one says Jacob. Well, I'll just use Jacob. I don't know if that was the exact example, but you're going to see he just takes it and he changes one letter, or he leaves a letter off, or whatever. It's, right? It's the same thing with here. This is an incantation name. Moroni was supposed to have appeared after a failed treasure excursion when Joseph prayed that night, seeking some sort of a messenger. But the messenger's thought was supposed to help him get treasure. It wasn't until much later that Moroni became an angel instead of a treasure guardian. Remember, that's what they were doing. This is why they were using the peepstones, the money digger, and because the superstitious belief back in the day was that spirits guarded treasure, and not only guarded treasure and kept you from finding it, but it kept it lower so that you could never find it. And so the money digger would use witchcraft and occult techniques to locate the treasure in the spirit and deal with it so you can get it. And that's even embedded in this name, Moroni. But I like what...
Okay.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Hello? Okay. Hey Siri, set the table to 100%. Okay. All right. The narrative of Messiah, the finding of the interpreters. Among the lost stories we can restore the Book of Mormon narrative is one that scholars have known was missing but lacked detail of. How did the Nephites acquire the scrying tool called the interpreters, which had originally been in the procession of another book of... Oh no. Hold on. Um... Okay, actually, I'm just gonna let us finish this. I don't feel like reading. I don't feel well. So I'm just gonna finish this. So let's finish this.
This is Mormon scholar Hugh Nibley noted that the prevalence of names in the Book of Mormon with the root Mor, M-O-R, he suggested that the root may be, that's right, Tom, Egyptian, and it means beloved. You know, you guys, man, you guys just go, well, but that's still the tip of the iceberg. Listen to all these different things. Now, again, he's picking from here, he's picking from there, he's grabbing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and he's putting this whole thing together. He's ripping it off from the Bible. He's doing this, even we're going to see in a second, contemporary sources. He's taking some Freemasonry and all this stuff. Witchcraft is embedded just like Freemasonry through and through. Listen, let me give you a couple more examples. Again, this is from the same BYU professor, Professor Quinn. Joseph's visit to Moroni, again, was linked to the art of necromancy. Again, remember September 21st, when he had this first visited? That's the autumn equinox, which is linked with necromancy and the occult. That's the best time you're supposed to get a appearance. The Mormon Church, listen, the Mormon Church was organized on April 6th. And believe it or not, check it out, many Mormons claim that was Jesus' birthday. What's interesting is there's ample evidence that Joseph Smith chose this day because it was a day that his strong astrological beliefs indicated would be a good day to set out on a new venture. Next one. Also, almost every wedding that Joseph Smith had, and he had a bunch, was on a day that was astrologically significant for, quote, good for romance and love. And Brigham Young even claimed that Joseph Smith tried to introduce astrology into the Mormon church doctrine even back in his Nauvoo days. So that's on record too. LDS doctrine, again, is not just obsessed with seer stones, right? Some of them, the later ones today, they're just trying to whatever. But they got a major problem. They have another book called the D&C, or the Doctrine and Covenants. And this is, you got the Book of Mormon, you got some other additional ones. We'll get to the fourth one later. Okay, but, and I checked this out even today. I said, you got to be kidding me. Are you serious? They really have that in there? Listen to this. Seer stone, remember this, the witchcraft thing? The D&C claims, quote, we each will have our own seer stone and the earth will become a giant seer stone. Well, that makes it all acceptable, doesn't it? Because we all get one now. It's not witchcraft. It's okay. And the earth becomes a big seer stone. It's okay. What? I checked this up today again, and I'm going, and I came across this blog. It's a Mormon blog, And right there at the very top, there's this person asking the obvious question. Can somebody please tell me how in the world the DNC says that the earth is going to become a giant seer stone? What is up with that? And you know what the responses were below that primarily? You know, we really should focus on more important things than the same thing. I couldn't believe it, right? Just saw that today. Okay, but that's again, many Book of Mormon names also have parallels to the occult, to magic, and things of that nature. As we saw again with the word Mormon, she monster, devil's gate, it's a spirit or specter. Back in the day, of course, they say, nope, Tom, it's Reformed Egyptian. It means more good. No, don't think so. Alma's a big name that they use. That's supposed to be a Nephite prophet. Well, it just so happens that Alma means soul in Spanish, and Almazine was a magical spirit that was a giver of treasure. Drop a couple words. And you're used to this because you're doing that with witchcraft, seeking treasure. And then you slap that into your own book. Nephi is related to a common Jewish Kabbalist term for spirit, Nephis. He just dropped a little bit there. Nephis. Kabbalists identify the Nephis as spirits that can be called forth through necromancy. Also, they teach that Cain, this is kind of a weird thing. Well, there's a lot of this, unfortunately. But anyway, that Cain became what's called Master Mahan, M-A-H-A-N, which we might get into later. Well, that just happens to be taken from ancient magic, that belief system. So that's nothing new. Okay. Also, the 3 degrees of glory. We'll get into this later, right? Because you got to work your way up. And hopefully you can make your way all the way to the top. That's why you got to go on the back tour. You got to go on the temple thing. Because if you want to make it to the top, where you get to be your own god, your wife gets to be a goddess, and you get to forever populate your own planet with spirit babies. Once again, my wife don't want to do that. But anyway, it's not true. But they have a tiered system. And it just happens to be 3. Okay. But guess what? Even that was not original. That is demonstrated to come from a guy named Emanuel Swedenborg. Remember him? That's where we started. You could have gone all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. You will be like God, the lie in Genesis 3. That's where we started historically in our history of the New Age movement, right? Emanuel Swedenborg. Well, that's what he taught. And, quote, Smith knew who he was and read his books. So even the celestial kingdom thing from Mormonism is nothing new. It's one from the founders, the promoters of the New Age movement. And it's also in Kabbalist teachings. They have 3 heavens, the celestial, the terrestrial, and the infernal. Smith, all he did was change the name of the last one, because infernal don't sound no good, apparently. And then it's like, I don't know if it was a long day or something, but he didn't put apparently too much thought in it. So, okay, celestial, terrestrial. I just dropped the R slap in the L. How about celestial? That sounds good. What do you think, Mike? You know, it's like the guy, you ever go to the guy, it had to be like 4:59. You had a minute to go before you got to go home, right, before 5 o'clock. Right? And here comes the next thing you got to name down that list, right? And here it is, right? And it's of course, it's the fly. And you're sitting there going like, really? That's all the better you can do? You must have looked at that thing, looked at the clock, it took off, and you said, okay, it's a fly, let's go home. You know what I'm saying? I've always wondered about that. But anyway, let's move on. So he didn't make the thing. It's crazy. He's ripping this off even from a guy from New Age. Right? He's grabbing from everywhere he can to come up with this stuff. Okay. The fact is, this guy grabbed the Book of Mormon. It literally is a hodgepodge of everything you could think of, even contemporary stuff during his time. And it's obvious. Okay. It is completely obvious. Let me give you another example. Let's take a look at this.
Where did Mormonism come from? Is it based on literal events, or did Joseph Smith draw inspiration from somewhere else? Smith's first vision was first recorded in 1832, but others in the area had published similar visions years before Smith did. They were stirred by a passage of scripture, went into the woods in the morning, knelt to pray but couldn't speak, felt that others were around, seized by a power, then despair, then weakness, felt near to death, saw some remarkable light, like above the brightness of the sun, saw God and Jesus in bodily form with indescribable glory, told all churches were corrupt, more specifically that their professors were corrupt, and there was more information that couldn't be written. Of these visionaries, one was a well-known preacher who visited Smith's community, one met with Smith's family, and one had his vision published in the Smith's local newspaper, all before Joseph recorded his vision. Smith also claimed that he had received the golden plates, a record of the ancient Nephite people, from the angel Moroni in 1827. That same year, an English translation of a story called The Golden Pot was published, about a man who received a record of the ancient Atlantean people from the spirit Lindhorst. The author had even been promoted in Smith's local newspaper. The story similarities include: both men are meditating when they see a great light, get shocked, and meet a messenger in a vision. Both have 3 visions in one evening. Both are called to transcribe records from an old civilization and are promised a seer device. Both messengers are the descendants and archivists of their civilizations, are called Prince of the Spirits, and can appear in the form of an amphibian. Going to retrieve the records, both men encounter an evil power, are chastised for not being serious enough, and are told to wait 1 year to see if they will be allowed to receive them. Both visit vast chambers with treasures, breastplates, dazzling light from an unknown source, a library, and tripods with Egyptian artifacts. Both men are injured by evil spirits, pass their final test, and get access to their records on the fall equinox. The story content of the Book of Mormon, published in 1830, could easily have been inspired by a book called View of the Hebrews, first published in 1823 in Poultney, Vermont. Both books are about Hebrews leaving the Old World, sailing to the uninhabited Americas, and becoming the ancestors of the Native Americans. They split into 2 people groups, one barbarous and one civilized. There is a change from monarchy to republic. A Messiah figure visits. The Christian gospel is preached in the Americas. Whole chapters of the book of Isaiah are quoted. After long wars, the barbarous eventually destroy the civilized, but there is a lost book of God left buried in a hill. Oliver Cowdery, a witness to the Book of Mormon, was from Poultney, Vermont, and met Joseph just after the second printing of View of the Hebrews. Later, Smith even quoted and cited the book in an article. So all the necessary building blocks of Smith's new religion were close at hand, and even though he supplied plenty of his own details, it's fairly obvious that they're hung on the framework of these sources. So is it more likely that Smith's experiences were really genuine, or that they developed from his own absorbent imagination?
If that were to take place today, you know what would happen? He would go to jail for plagiarism. That's why, getting further, even in my own research in this, and I knew it was bad, but I used to think, man, this guy was a great storyteller. He's not even a storyteller. He's a story ripoff. Okay? When you take, he's taken it from everything. He's taken it from contemporary writing. Give me the golden pot. You could at least said the silver cup or something, but the golden plates. You say, come on, man. You got to be kidding me, right? Taking a little bit of this, whatever, and again, including Freemasonry, saw last week, also with witchcraft. Okay, he's just grabbing it from all kinds of stuff. This is where they came from. As a young man, Joseph Smith not only worked on his family farm, but again, he worked in with witchcraft. Again, we saw with the seer stones, but also in, quote, blessing crops, finding lost articles, predicting future events, or prophesying, or using divining rods. All of it's occult techniques. Most historians, Mormon or not, who work at the sources, listen, this is their words, not mine, accept as fact Joseph Smith as his career as a, quote, village magician. And that's in history, right? And it's interesting to note that as early as 1828, members of the, listen to this, Methodist Church were forced to make a decision with regard to Joseph Smith. Smith had taken steps to join the Methodist Church, but they felt that his dealings in witchcraft made him unfit to be a member. So they knew him and his family's background and his practices. He actually tried to join the Methodist Church, okay, in 1828, and he said, they said, absolutely not, dude. You're into witchcraft, right? Now here's what's weird. Now you got another problem. It certainly is strange that Joseph Smith would try to join the Methodist Church, because we saw in the first study, this flies in the face of his first claim that he supposedly had his first vision when he was supposed to be between 14 and 15 years old, which he stated emphatically at that time that there were 2 personages who warned him that he should not join any church, and they were all wrong. So then why are you later trying to join the Methodist Church when you tell us that from the get-go as a young boy you were told not to join any, but then later you did, and then they rejected you because of witchcraft? The whole thing is wild, folks. With the mounting evidence of Joseph Smith's involvement in witchcraft, members of the Mormon Church are faced with a weighty decision. Listen to how this is put. Quote, can they accept as a prophet a man who was involved in occultic practices at the very time he was supposed to have been receiving so-called revelations from God? I don't think that's a good ground to be on. And as one former follower of Joseph Smith expressed, quote, a person must come out from the company of Joseph the sorcerer. Ooh, interesting. Now you know why they're doing a really good rewriting, repainting, revisualizing campaign, right? But unless they want to tear down all those the edifices, the temples and stuff, it's awfully hard to hide it, because on their edifices you see signs of pentagrams and Freemasonry. Oh, by the way, Freemasonry. Remember we saw Freemasonry last week with the beehive? Reed and Debbie were texting me pictures. They're on their way up to Canada for a conference this weekend, and they were giving me pictures of, even on their highway signs, guess what's on off to the left? It's a beehive. Beehive's a huge thing in Freemasonry. It's all over the place. And then, of course, they had to give me the picture of this Kolob Mountain. So I said, well, if you find Pentagram Peak, let me know. Send me that picture too. Anyway, but it's true. It's unfortunate. It's there. It's just, unfortunately, people don't learn their own history, even Mormons, or they're encouraged not to. Notice the response of the presidents, the leadership, and even from the blog that I saw today. When the facts are brought out, how are the people trained to respond? Well, yeah, whatever. But we need to just focus on, the good stuff. And how sad that is. That's a cult. That's a cult when you can't ask questions, or when something comes up, you're told to just forget about it. Okay? Lord willing, next time we're going to actually, maybe, most likely, Tom, get back in that workbook. For a little bit anyway, as we're going to take a look at basically that leads up Joseph Smith up to his death. Again, after his death, we saw before, they went to a split. One group goes to the Reform. The ones that we're more familiar with, Brigham Young, they go out to Utah. Okay. And then they begin to form their leadership. We'll talk about some of that leadership structure, some of their basic beliefs. Then we're going to get into, of course, their authority. This Book of Mormon, what they believe is better than what we got. And at that point, we're probably going to get into, more specifically, the golden plates. And what in the world is this Reformed Egyptian thing? And what about this thing that he supposedly translated from Egyptian? I'm sure he got that pretty accurate, because they found it. You know how much he got right? Yeah, rhymes with 0, but we'll get to that in a future study.
Well, hi, this is Pastor Billy Crone of Sunrise Baptist Church and Get a Life Ministries, and I hope you enjoyed today's study. But in closing, before you go, let me ask you one.
Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Okay. I had eaten something that made me not feel well, that was way too spicy and hurt my stomach, and so I didn't want to read anymore. But anyway, that was going to be the end of it for tonight. We only got through like 2 sections, I think, not 3. But hopefully it was good. All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye.